You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we're talking about a topic that, for those of us who are women, is incredibly hard. For those of us who are trauma survivors, is incredibly hard. And that is asking for help, and asking for help without guilt or fear. So with me today is Deborah Grayson Riegel, and she is going to help us overcome this hang up that we tend to have. So, Deborah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you. This is something that I struggle with. And I know so many people, especially women, because it's in our DNA to just kind of shoulder the burden.
Yeah.
And not ask for help.
Yep.
But men do it too. Men are just as guilty. So, I guess let's just start with, what has been your experience as to what stops people from asking for help?
There are a lot of things that stop people from asking for help, and they all make total sense, right? So nobody who is not asking for help is behaving in a ridiculous manner or an irrational manner. All of these are very justifiable. So first of all, from a big picture perspective, it can be the culture in which we grew up, right? So that is anything from literally the country in which we grew up, and certain cultures are more likely to want to handle things privately or personally than reach out to other people for help, as well as our families of origin, right? What were some of the messages in our families of origin about asking for help? So number one is just what we were, what we grew up with in terms of our natural culture. And those tend to be our earliest examples. There are also plenty of stories in the media and social media about, people who've achieved great things, and they don't always spend a lot of time talking about who helped them get there, right? So if you're thinking about right now, while we're recording this, it's the Winter Olympics, right? None of those people who walked away with a medal or even just made it to the Olympics, even if they didn't get a medal, got there on their own. They had a whole team of people helping them. Oh, yeah. We've got a lot of mindsets, a lot of beliefs that we have about the vulnerability of asking for our help. Maybe if I ask for help, it'll mean people think I'm not credible. People think I'm not capable. I'm going to be bothering people. Everybody is too busy themselves. And so there are lots of different really, really good reasons why we don't ask for help. And those really good reasons are actually getting us into more trouble than they should.
Oh, absolutely. As you were talking, I was sitting here thinking of some of the scenarios that I know for me personally. Yeah. Being a single mom at one point, so I had to do everything myself. When I was newly widowed, the last thing I wanted to do was burden anybody with, my issues. So, things like that, we just, like you said, we don't want to bother anybody. We don't want to be perceived as incompetent or weak. And so we just tend to, take on. And even though that's something that I recognize in myself and I know, it's still really hard for me to ask for help.
Yeah, you're describing something really common and understandable. And I will even add to that is that, one of the reasons that we don't ask for help is fear of rejection, right? What happens if we make ourselves vulnerable to somebody and say, I need help with something, and they say no, or worse, they say yes when they really mean no, right? Or they say yes, and then we find out that there are strings attached, right? This is something that's a quid pro quo, or they're going to be reminding us of, forever. Remember the time that you couldn't on your own and I helped you. So there's, for folks who have experienced trauma, it is likely that there were people who could and should have come to help and didn't. And so there is an automatic response where you're protecting yourself against that fear of rejection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And And on the other side of it, though, is those who should have, could have, would have come to help. Oftentimes, number one, don't know that we need help, don't know how to help us. And they just, that they're afraid that if they come and ask us for help, it's going to make us feel bad.
Yeah.
So, they just kind of turn a blind eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's almost a catch-22 there.
It absolutely can be. And, in the book that I wrote with my daughter, Sophie, Go to Help, we talk a lot about the anxiety that people have about revealing that they need help, asking other people for help, wondering whether it will have been worth it. And then the idea of offering help, thinking about, do I have the skill to help this person? Do I have the will to help this person? Do I have the capacity to help this person? Is our relationship at a place where we can ask for help? And not to overcomplicate something that can be simple, but there are a number of factors to consider. And we believe that asking somebody, how can I help you, is one of the most powerful questions that you can ask, whether this is a friend, a family member, somebody in your organization or community.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, my whole life, my favorite question has always been either how can I help you or how can I support you?
Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
Which really in turn often leads to me taking on more than I can handle. But I think that, part of that for me is the people pleaser. And that comes from my trauma.
That definitely makes a lot of sense, right? Again, I always describe the fact that as humans, we are animals, and animals only behave in ways that they think are going to get them something, right? I have a dog who is laying out in the sun right now. And even if I think she's being naughty, which of course she is never naughty, ever, ever, ever. But if I were to think she's being naughty, she is behaving in a way that is trying to get her something good for her. And we do that too, whether it's over helping, we're doing it because we think it's getting us something good, like the approval and love of other people, or not helping or not asking for help means that we're getting something like protection against rejection. And so I think one thing we can all do to help ourselves is to give ourselves credit for some entrenched mindsets and behaviors that have served us thus far to protect us. And if we're going to take our lives and our work and our impact to the next level, we need to adjust rather than double down.
Absolutely. One of the things that I try to remember and remind myself when I'm struggling to ask for help is, number one, it shows a sign of strength because I recognize that I am in a place where I need assistance. And I am not afraid to ask for it. So it doesn't show a sign of weakness. It shows a sign of strength. But number two is you're giving somebody else a gift. And that gift is the ability to help you.
Yes.
It's actually something very powerful that you can give to somebody else. It's not selfish. It's actually, in most cases, selfless.
And you're pointing towards the idea of being thoughtful and mindful about who you want to ask for help, right? So I ask people for help who we have a whole chapter in the book called People Are Wanting and Waiting to Help You, right? Mm-hmm. There are people whom you have helped, who I have helped, who when we ask them for help, they're flattered. They're like, oh, I've been waiting to see how I could repay a favor or be of service. Thank you for being vulnerable with me, including me, thinking of me, and they're flattered even if they can't help, right? Nobody is ever insulted that I wanted their help, even if they couldn't help. And so you're pointing towards the idea that when we ask somebody for help, it should be somebody who would think that it was a nice request we were making of them, and it's because we value what they can offer. If you are thinking of asking somebody for help who you anticipate is going to contribute to you feeling bad about it, contribute to you actually being more worried about what's going to come on the other side of that help, then that is not somebody you should be asking for help.
Exactly. And, on the other, not really the flip side, but to go along with that is being mindful of what you're asking and how often you're asking. Mm-hmm. Because, you can go from one extreme to another of not asking enough or not asking at all to asking way too much.
Yeah. Yep.
Like my teenagers.
Yes, that sounds like exactly the right age, right? And so there are a couple of things to think about when it comes to that. So there is the kind of help that help somebody develop their own agency, their own ability, their own competency, their own confidence. So you are helping them and then perhaps slowly backing off until they can do it themselves. So an example of that would be driving lessons, right? You may or may not be there with your teens, but if they say, help me drive, you're not going to put them in the wheel of the car and say, great, go. I'll let you know when you hit a tree, right? That's under helping. And you're also hopefully not going to drive with your one or two hands on the wheel with them, because then they're never going to learn how to do it. So, right, you're giving them direction at the beginning when they're learning it, and then slowly backing off how much you tell them, and so that they can demonstrate it themselves. By the way, this is why our family hired people to do this, because neither my husband nor I had the mental wherewithal to do that with our kids, who are both excellent drivers. But so, yeah, you want to think about, is this the kind of help where I'm really going to want them to know how to do this themselves, in which case you have to start backing off your help? Is this something where this help is going to be chronic and maybe we need to bring in a team of helpers, right? So for example, if you are caring for an aging parent or somebody with a physical or mental disability, that may not get better anytime in the near future. And if you are the only helper, you are going to get burnt out, and then you will be of no help to anybody else, including yourself and including that person. So to think about a team of helpers is something else to consider as well.
Absolutely. And, and you hit the nail right there with burnout. And those of us who are people pleasers and we're constantly, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. We hit burnouts. I hit burnouts so much because I keep telling everybody yes. I mean, here we are. I'm looking at my oldest and my two grandbabies moving back home for a bit after she's getting out of a toxic relationship. But what that means is now I have to take the two girls to school in the morning because she'll be at work. And on top of that, as soon as I drop them off at school, I have to haul butt to get my other daughter to work. And, so that all cuts into my day. And so I know that I'm going to hit a wall. I know it, because it just means I'm taking on too much on top of all the stuff that I've already got going on.
Yep. And so I've got a couple of thoughts if you're open to them.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So number one, that's a helping strategy, is before you give advice, ask somebody if they would like your advice. We tend to assume everybody wants our advice, which is definitely not the case, as you definitely know with teenagers. So, one thing is, I heard you say that your burnout is inevitable. And the fact that you are already ahead of it leads me to believe that there are some things you could do to slow it down, prevent it, or mitigate it. I don't know that you can avoid it altogether, but it hasn't happened yet. And so I'm wondering what kind of help might be helpful to you so that you haven't just, left the tank empty and you've got some bandwidth for yourself.
Yeah, I'm looking into all of that. How can I structure things? Who can I call on to step in and shoulder some of the burden? I have another daughter next door that could possibly help chauffeur kids around here and there, around her work schedule. Once I get my daughter's car fixed, she'll be able to drive herself to work, and that will take that off if her car is fixable. And that will take, that burden off. But so there's some things, that I've got going on. There's only a couple months left of school. After that, if they're still here, at the beginning of the next school year, they will be switching to the school in my district, which means they can take the bus.
Yes.
you know?
Yeah. So I want to congratulate you on a couple of things, right? So one thing first of all, I want to congratulate you for being the kind of mom where your kid knows they can come home, that you have provided a safe space for them, which if you have not already congratulated yourself, let me congratulate you on being that kind of
Thank
parent.
you.
That's number one. Number two, of course, being that kind of parent comes with some burdens, which is, they keep coming back home.
I know.
Right. So it's funny. My husband and I just were moving into a new house in about a month, and people sort of expected that we would downsize because both of our kids are in college. I go, no, they keep coming back home, which is actually a lovely thing. But more about you, less about me. So number two, I want to congratulate you on being able to anticipate potential burnout. Number three, on already starting to think about what are some, levers I can shift to decrease the likelihood or the severity or the earliness of the onset. Number four is you've got some long range planning going on, which when you are feeling overwhelmed is really hard to do. So you are doing everything right now.
To do the planning before the overwhelm hits, because they haven't moved in yet. So I still have some breathing room.
Yes.
It's definitely trying to get some of that planning done before the overwhelm and chaos ensues. And a lot of that is me working on my asking for help. So, and not only asking for help, but when people offer it, accepting it.
Beautiful.
And that's another tough one. So for example, my fiance, hey, I'll go pick up the kids from school, or I'll go pick up Isabella from work, or, instead of me saying, no, I've got it. I got to do everything. It's here's keys, go.
Yeah. We're so used to saying, I'm good, I've got it. Right. How many times a day do you say, I'm good, I've got it?
Far too
when
many.
In fact, if you took just like a minute, you'd be like, yeah, I am good. And I've got it. And it would make my life easier if you got it.
Yep.
Right. Asking for help doesn't mean you're not good and you don't got it.
Exactly. It means you're on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
In so many cases.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about this book.
Yes. So this book is called Go to Help, 31 Strategies to Offer, Ask for, and Accept Help. I've co-written it with my daughter, Sophie, who is a junior at Duke University. And this is actually our second book together. So the first book that we wrote together was called Overcoming Overthinking, 36 Ways to Tame Anxiety for Work, School, and Life. So Sophie and I both have anxiety disorders. I have 3. She has 4 because she's very competitive. So she always wants to one-up me, even in mental health and mental illness. And we wrote Overcoming Overthinking right before the pandemic. And little did we know that it would become the most important topic in the world. Yep. And one of the things that happened as we were talking to corporations and nonprofits and colleges and camps about anxiety was people kept sort of glomming on to the one chapter we had written about being help fluent. And the idea of being help fluent is recognizing that you probably have 1 or 2 go-to ways of helping people. And if you're like most people, it looks like, let me tell you how to fix it, or let me just fix it for you. And if you're going to be a better leader, parent, partner, community member, you actually need to develop a wide range of strategies of offering help because different people need different things at different times. So we wrote a book about that.
Wow. So I'm totally an overthinker. That's a whole nother show.
Yeah, hopefully I'll earn an invitation back.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we'll definitely have to have a episode about that. So, but I think that's so cool. I couldn't imagine sitting down and writing a book with one of my kids. I think one of us would end up killing each other.
We've got a very good working relationship. But I think one of the smartest things was something that our publisher suggested we do before we wrote Overcoming Overthinking, which was to decide who owns the project 51%. And the person who owns the project 51% gets the final call. And that doesn't mean that we don't consult with each other, but on Overcoming Overthinking, Sophie owned it 51%, and Go to Help, I owned it 51%. And it just made it easier for us to make calls, nice. Hard calls. But that it was really helpful that we have a lot of trust in the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have a fantastic relationship with my kids. I just know them. I know them. I've tried to teach them and help them with their homework. But, well, anyway, Deborah, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really fun.
Thank you for having me. It's really an honor. And I hope that, no pun intended, that this was helpful.
I hope so too. It was for me, and I definitely hope so for our listeners. Listeners, you know the drill. I will have all of Deborah's information in the show notes, the links to both her books and all of that. So just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up her episode, and everything will be there nice and neat and orderly for you. If you're listening from one of the apps, iTunes, or not iTunes, I keep wanting to call it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeart, Pandora, wherever, please hit like, subscribe, give us a review, all of that good fun stuff. Thank you as always for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.